Hello everyone, Matt here from PCGamesN and I'm joined by Julian.
Hello.
And we are going to tell you exactly how to play Artifact, the new card game from Valve. So, PCGamesN have been lucky enough to be invited out to Valve to play Artifact. It's not out until later this year, but we've had a little bit of a hands-on already. Unfortunately, neither me nor Jules here have actually been able to play the game ourselves, but Ali, one of our journalists who you might have seen if you watch any of our LOL videos, he's been playing it and he's been telling us exactly how it works. He's been taking photographs while he's out there. We weren't allowed to capture any of it, so don't expect any of the game in motion. But you can see some photographs that he's taken and some screenshots that Valve have provided. But let's start at the beginning. You know, there is a very specific way that card games tend to play out. They're in phases. Obviously, at the beginning is putting together a deck and understanding what your cards are. So, Jules, explain to me what is a Artifact deck? What is in it?
Okay, so this is going to be somewhat familiar to anyone who's played Magic the Gathering, which would make sense because Richard Garfield, the creator of Magic the Gathering, is also one of the architects on Artifact. So it's split into four colours. We've got red, black, blue and green, and each of those represents different sorts of heroes from Dota 2.
Right.
So red are your tanks and your bruisers. They're characters like Axe. You've got blue representing your magic users, so Zeus is one of the examples we've had used for that. And then we have black for assassin characters and green for jungle and support characters. Now, you could go after a deck with a single colour potentially, but this hasn't been confirmed. What we've seen though is decks which mix two of these colours together. Which
would make sense because obviously the idea is that your deck represents kind of like the five kind of heroes that you'd have in Dota, right?
Yeah.
And you want to mix. You wouldn't have an entire team fielded of tanks, right? So you probably therefore make a hybrid deck, which would be some tanks, some support, or some tanks, some mage. So yeah, it seems from what we've been told that a deck would be a hybrid of two colours, roughly.
Yeah. So you'll end up seeing people who are playing red-black decks or green-blues and these sorts of things. And it's one of those things where every one of these heroes and the cards that they have accessible because of the colours they've chosen will have some level of synergy between them. So the way it's going to work is you're going to pick 5 hero cards.
Okay.
They're going to determine the colour scheme of your deck. But as far as we know, there doesn't seem to be a hard limit on how many cards are going to be part of your deck.
Okay.
So similar to Magic, where you can go for very large decks if you wanted to, this is something which you'll be able to do in Artifact as well. The issue with that would be is that when you go for a very large deck, you have less control over what cards are going to be turning up. You can't predict it because you have so many possibilities that could turn up every time you draw from your hand.
But of course, on the other hand, a smaller deck.
Yeah, then you can have a much stronger grasp on what's going to be coming up. So you can almost control how frequently you're seeing the more powerful cards because you've got fewer possibilities that could be drawn from the hand.
Yeah.
So yeah, while you pick your heroes, there are also spell cards and item cards.
Right.
Now, this isn't exactly how you might expect. So item cards don't actually come up in your hand.
Right.
They're things that you'll buy from a shop, which we'll talk about later.
Sure.
So it's only spell cards which are in your deck. You've picked your 5 heroes, and those are all the ones you're sticking with throughout the game. And then your spell cards are the ones which you're going to be shuffling through and drawing into your hand each turn.
Right.
It's also important to talk about what's on a hero card. So it is a health stat, an attack stat, and armor stat, if you have any items that sort of add armor to your hero.
So that's quite familiar from like if you've played Hearthstone or any of those kind of classic games, that is a similar method. It's just, as we'll explain later, the way that these come into play are very different. There's a level of complexity to Artifact that we're not typically used to in mainstream digital card games.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so that's how your deck works. But the thing which really sets Artifact apart from other card games is its various boards or lanes. So tell us about this.
Sure. So as you'd expect, Artifact is the Dota card game, so it brings much across from Dota 2, of which I guess the most important thing about a MOBA is that it's split into lanes. So to replicate that, you actually have 3 individual boards which represent your top, middle and bottom lane. As a turn goes, like a turn of Artifact sounds like it will be going on for a very long time in comparisons to other digital card games. What you're doing is you're playing through these lanes or boards individually. So you'll do the moves on top, and then you'll do the moves on middle, then bottom, and then that's your turn sort of finished. So each of the boards are the same. It's just that they are on different things, and there are things that change over boards. We'll get into that later. But basically, the idea is that on a board, if you can imagine, there is a river that splits the board in two. There are multiple slots for different cards for when you're playing onto them, and top and bottom of the board, if you can imagine where the hero portrait would be in Hearthstone, that is where your tower is.
Okay.
Now, the objective of the game, a game of Artifact entirely revolves around destroying 2 towers. Towers have 40 HP, which obviously you'll attack using characters. And basically, if you can destroy that tower, take it from 40 HP down to 0, that is 1 tower destroyed. Do that with another tower, game over, you have won. The important thing is, though, is that Dota obviously stands for Defense of the Ancient, right? If a tower is destroyed, it spawns an Ancient which has 80 HP. If you can defeat that Ancient, game over.
So basically this means that you are given that option for, there's that tactical complexity which you suddenly get with this, where it's like you could take out a tower with its 40 HP on one board, and you can either then focus your attention and maybe even move your heroes to another board and focus on another tower, which might be an easier get, or you could double down on that initial board and try and go after the Ancient.
Yeah, absolutely. If you've kind of taken down a tower and the Ancient has spawned and you think that your lane is really, really well prepared here, all you need to do is bring in a few more reinforcements. Focus down. I mean, it's 80 HP, it's a lot to take down. But if you think you can do it and that's a better system for you, then great. Or you obviously then have the option of taking out another tower. And so it's either essentially, can you take out 80 HP over 2 different lanes, or can you take down an Ancient and a tower in one lane? There's a breadth of choice here, right? Now, of course, in a MOBA like Dota, one of the key elements is the creep wave, right? We're used to having little armies of minions marching down lanes, and Artifact actually replicates this, right?
Yeah, it's fascinating the way they've gone about doing this. So, as well as the cards which you're controlling, so you've got your hero cards that you've put down, you've picked those out, and the spell cards that you're using to both augment their abilities and also hit creeps. There are these AI controlled and spawned in creeps.
Right.
Now, there's we haven't got a hard number on how many actually appear each turn, but between 1 and 3, it appears, spawn across the 3 different boards. So you might have some turns when 3 creeps suddenly appear on a single board, say on your top board, and they're heading off against each other, and you'll need to start placing your heroes and their attacks to try and head off the creep wave. Or you might end up with a board with no creeps spawning out at all, in which case your heroes are free to go and attack the tower unless they're being blocked by your opponent's own heroes.
Yeah.
So yeah, these instances where there are things which are very much within your control, and there are things which the game is throwing at you, as with Dota games themselves.
Right, so as you pointed out, there are things that are beyond your control. Actually, attacking is one of those. I know this sounds really, really bizarre, and I'm sure there are a bunch of people suddenly getting all flamed up, like, what, I can't control my heroes? No, basically, as you play heroes into the lane, and as creeps are played into the lane for you, they automatically attack. Obviously, this replicates auto-attacking from MOBAs, right? There is always, like, minions auto-attack, and your characters, when you right-click on people, auto-attack. This is its replication in card form. There is something that's a little bit more interesting about the way attacks work in Artifact. There's kind of like a range system. Basically, characters attack whatever is in front of them or diagonally to their left or right by 1 space. So what this means is let's say you've got 4 cards played down in a lane, and you're looking at like the middle card of those. Actually, let's say 5 because that makes it easier, right? And you're using your middle one. If the tower is right in front of them, that's fine, they can attack. If there's a minion just to their left, they can attack that minion. If there's a minion just to their right, they can attack that minion. If there's a minion on the far right or far left of your card, they can't attack that card, which means that positioning is vital to this game. You have to play cards where they will be useful. It also means that if there are cards already down in your lane and you bring in a hero and you really like them to attack the tower, you might not be able to get them in position because you might have to play them elsewhere.
So also it could mean, for instance, like if you had taking control essentially of the far right of your side of the board.
Yeah.
You're taking out the creeps in front of them and the heroes, then there is nothing that player can do to start blocking your hero's attacks and go straight to the tower.
Absolutely, yeah. There are abilities on other cards, and there are items that allow you to kind of swap positions on the board and stuff like that. As I say, positioning is a huge part of this game, and I think is one of the complexities that will really characterize it. But yeah, the key thing about attacking is that you don't actually have any control over basic attacks. The game does it looks like it's by random chance, right? There is probably some dice rolls going on in the background that dictate which direction your guys attack in, unless there is no other option for them to attack, in which case it's automatically the tower that gets attacked.
But there may well be cards or items that let you actually have much more control over where it is that your players, where your cards are both based, but also which direction they're attacking.
Yeah, we know of something called pathing cards that we don't quite yet know exactly how they work. Kind of like, we know that they exist, but with the experience that we have of the game at the moment, we can't exactly tell you how those works. I'm sure the moment it goes into beta and we can get playing on it, all of these answers will be provided. But as we'd expect from a game that has so much roots in MOBAs, it's not just about auto attacks. It's about abilities and spells. So give me an example of the kind of spell card that we can draw from a deck.
Okay, so one of the examples we have is one called Firestorm, which is basically you'll play it in one turn. It will sit on the board waiting to enact, and then the next turn, after you've gone through all three boards and go back to the initial, it will then cast, doing 2 damage to every creep and hero on that board.
Okay.
So this is pretty powerful when you talk about creeps having about 2 health and that sort of thing. You can clear them all out and then have your heroes have a straight run on the tower if they wanted it. So these sorts of things are going to be game changers. Whenever it's sort of you get like a powerful spell into the board, you are shaping and changing everyone's position. It's a powerful thing. But you don't have access to every single spell for every single deck.
Okay.
So as we talked about earlier with your heroes, the ones that you pick, changing the combination and the colour scheme that you've got for your deck, that also dictates what spells are available to you.
Right.
So for instance, if we had a red and a blue deck, that means we can only use red and blue spells. But because it's the heroes which are within the game fiction actually casting the spells, you need to have one of those heroes of that colour present on the board. So
right, okay.
If on top you've got only a red hero, then you can only cast red spells.
Because of course you need a tank or a bruiser to be able to actually do the ability that card dictates. And presumably then, so like if my mage is in bottom, I can only play blue cards in bottom.
Yes, exactly. And this also means that say you get into the position where a lane doesn't have a hero on it, either because they've been knocked out by another player or you've moved them into another lane, you have no agency on that lane. You can't cast any spells without a hero present to actually cast them for you.
So as we were saying before, positioning is key to this game. You know, it's not just about where they are within a board, it's making sure that there are heroes in a lane. You know, it's so important.
It also means, for instance, that there'll be instances when, say you've got a character with Blink Dagger, and we'll talk about items in a bit, but Blink Daggers let you jump a hero from one lane to another.
Right.
It might be that you're seeing on your middle lane that you really need to get someone in there who can cast blue spells. And so you take them from the top lane or the bottom lane where they're playing to mid, and then they can change the outcome of that board because they can bring those spells with them.
You gank the board, basically, you know, to use kind of Dota's language. Now, obviously, spells, we're pulling those out of our deck, putting them into our hands each turn. We've got some spells ready to play. Presumably it costs mana to play these cards.
Yes, so if you're familiar with many other card games, so for instance like Hearthstone and Magic both have this, where you have a mana pool which sort of grows as the game continues, giving you access to greater and more powerful spells. Every spell in Artifact has a mana cost, but also each board has its own separate mana pool.
Okay.
So for instance, like you could have an instance, so this was with the Crystal Mage as an example of this. She has a passive ability as part of her hero card, which means that if you do certain actions, you can increase the mana pool of the board that she is present on. So you might find yourself in the position where your top board is allowing 3 mana, your middle board 5 mana, and your bottom board 7 mana, which will mean that sort of on the top board you're quite limited in what spells you're able to cast, but on the bottom board you're able to...
dominating, right? Yeah.
Exactly. So this is one of those things where it's like the complexity of what you're able to do is very much determined by how you've been playing and the heroes you've chosen to pick.
Now, there's an interesting sort of like, that's roughly the phases of battle, right? You're playing cards, the game plays creeps, you're doing auto attacks, you're playing your spells and stuff like that. But the turn system isn't as clear cut as in Hearthstone, for example, where you play cards until you can't play anymore and tap the end turn. There's more of a back and forth kind of method across multiple boards here, right?
Yes.
It's quite complicated. Explain to me, Jules, how this works.
Okay, so yeah, as you'll have picked up, this is a somewhat complicated game. It's being played across 3 boards at once, and there is also a shop phase, which we've not even got into yet. But happily, the creators have made it somewhat simpler. You're not technically playing all 3 boards at once. You are taking them one by one. So every turn begins play on the top board, it then moves to the middle, then to the bottom, and then there's the shop phase right at the end. And so the way it works is that on the top board, you and your opponent will both first start playing spells based off what mana you have available to you. But at any point, you could decide, that's me, I'm done with this turn, I want to pass. Because you're using the spell cards in your hand across all those boards. So it might be there's one in your hand which you could play, but actually you want to save for a later
Sure,
board.
yeah.
So what happens in this instance was, say you and I are playing against one another, and we're on a board which has 5 mana available to us. Turn 1, you put down a spell that's going to cost 2 mana to cast, and you decide that's pretty much going to be your turn. It goes to me, I put down a 3 mana card, and then it goes back to you. You decide to pass, it goes back to me, and I think, well, actually, I think I can sweep this board, so I'm going to put down another spell card that's going to cost 1 mana. Goes back to you. Before you decide to pass, but now you want to counter the spell that I've cast, so you put down another spell and it goes back to me. I've decided this is all I want to do, so I've decided I'm going to pass. It goes back to you. You decide that's all you want to do. You decide to pass. All our spells then play out, and we go on to the next board.
Right, so it's not just a case of that there is your turn, my turn per lane. It's a case of we can be taking multiple actions until we've both decided that we are finished with our actions in this lane and we want to progress to the next lane.
Yeah.
And I presume that the cap is either you run out of cards in your hand, you run out of mana, or we've both come to the conclusion that tactically this is where we want to finish with the lane.
Yeah, and you don't necessarily want to be playing every single card that you have available to you on that turn, because it may be, as I said earlier, you want to use that card elsewhere.
Yeah.
But similarly as well, it's just also, it might not be for your tactical benefit to kill off a hero on that turn.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's how turns roughly work, but what do you actually get for killing creeps and
Sure.
heroes?
So obviously, as we know, our actual goal is to destroy the towers. The killing of creep and other heroes isn't necessarily the final goal. You will want to do that though, because anybody that has played a MOBA will know that killing enemies provides you with an income. It is gold. Don't worry, there's no such thing as last hitting in this or anything like that. They haven't gone that complex. But yes, essentially, killing a creep will get you 1 gold. Killing a hero will get you 5. Now, obviously, that is important because we want to increase the amount of money that we have so we can buy items. So, Jules, explain to me how do items work in Artifact?
So the way that the items work is that at the end of each turn phase, when you've gone through all 3 boards, you end up in the shop. And this is familiar to anyone who's been playing Dota. But in the shop, you can take the cash that you've been earning from killing all these creeps and you can buy item cards. Now, item cards split themselves up into 3 different sorts. You've got ones which can be used to buff your attack, your armor, or your health. Now, this is quite simple to get behind. It's also, if you get like an attack item, then it's going to be giving you greater attack points. So for instance, you can get like a short sword, which will give you +2 attack on that hero. And you assign item cards to specific heroes. So you can end up, by the end of the game, in the later stages, your 5 heroes all sporting quite substantial item sets. Yeah. Now, these are obviously going to be things which you'll want to increase your attack power so that you can get against the towers and this sort of thing, but they also can come with abilities. We mentioned the Blink Dagger earlier, so this is something which is familiar to anyone who's been playing Dota. It's a weapon in the MOBA version. It's a weapon that lets you sort of dart and teleport around the battle space, and so it's something which gives you a great advantage over enemy heroes.
I think I can see where this is going for a laning system in a card game, right?
Yes, so normally you would find that your heroes are locked into the lane that you've picked for them, but actually if you give them the Blink Dagger, then they can use that ability to jump between the different boards. So as we used as an example earlier, you could have a hero who is of a certain colour, arm them with a blink dagger, move them into another board, and you bring agency of that colour to that board.
Yeah.
There's an incredibly powerful
So if your middle lane is in desperate need of reinforcements from a mage, as long as you've got a mage, a blue hero that's equipped with the blink dagger, we can get those into position, think through our plan, make sure they're there, and then start casting blue spells left, right, and centre.
Absolutely. Now, while obviously the whole game has been dressed out in Dota clothes, there are some things which aren't direct translations. There's not going to be any sorts of upgrading your items by combining them and that sort of thing. Once you buy an item, it sits into your deck, which is going to be separate from your spell deck, and you can put them down onto a hero at any time on your turn. But for instance, if there is already a weapon there, so I used the example earlier of a short sword. If you had a short sword and you wanted to replace it with a blink dagger, you would just wipe out the card that was underneath, and the short sword doesn't go back into your inventory or anything like that. It's just gone.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so I think that we've covered pretty much the basics there. Say the basics. It's quite complicated to even just get to this point, but we can already start seeing some of the ways that the later game and how you're going to be able to build your deck are going to impact what you can do in the game.
Oh, absolutely, yeah, because certain items have far more complexity than other ones. As you say, there is the short sword, which is just +2 attack damage to whoever wields it. But then you've got an item that basically it provides a minion, so presumably a creep that's with you with +4 health, and if it can survive a combat phase, it then gets another 2 health. I'm not entirely sure if that stacks for every combat phase that it can survive, but obviously there is complexity. You want to plan ahead, right, to make sure that works. There's all sorts of things to consider, and there are spells that you can cast that don't apply to the board that you're on. So if you know that there's some stuff going down in bottom lane, but you're in top, and that's where your caster is. If you've got a spell that is a crossboard spell, I think they call them, you can cast it in top, knowing that later on it will actually affect bottom lane. All these sort of things. You also have to remember as well that kind of like, yes, creep die, and they die for good. They might be, there will be respawns to take in. Your heroes die. If your hero gets killed, you then have to wait a turn for them to play in. So you might want to do sacrifices, knowing that you've got a turn where you might be able to play something else, or knowing that you can do that turn without that hero in the board. There are loads of kind of things to think about here.
It's also really easy to see how over the course of a game, as the mana pools on each of the boards is increasing, and also the amount of gold that you manage to earn is going to change and increase the abilities of what it is you've got in play. So for instance, after say 3 turns of the game, and your mana board, the mana pool on each board is increased, so you can put down more damaging and more complex spells. You're also at that position where you're starting to build out an item set for your heroes, and so you're going to have heroes that, as you say, are able to you could kit them out in items which are specifically designed to increase the creep power, or you've got ones which are going to give your hero special abilities, or you're going to give them ones which, say they're a support hero, are going to be able to help other heroes within that board, or potentially on cross board as well.
I mean, kind of like the way that this comes together is like we're all used to kind of going out onto the internet. We have a Hearthstone deck guide on PCGamesN, but it's not just about deck guides anymore. It's about build guides for specific heroes in the same way that you would build a tank or an attack damage kind of character in Dota. All these kind of levels, and it's not just that mana building. It replicates kind of like what Hearthstone does, is that towards the end of a Hearthstone game you are playing incredibly powerful characters and spells and stuff like that, but it replicates kind of like how in a MOBA over time you will unlock your W, your A, and stuff like that, your Qs, your Rs, your ultimate abilities. You're unlocking those by having more mana to be able to play those cards. The kind of like the tension build of a MOBA match is quite clearly here as part of this card game. And also we're still at the point where we've not seen that many of the different hero cards, but when we do, we're going to start seeing how they've been translated from Dota over onto the board. So for instance, one example I know of, Zeus, who is a powerful spell caster in Dota 2. They have been translated into the board as a card where it's into Artifact with a card which after turn 4 they get access to more powerful abilities. So it's sort of this thing of like, you can have carry characters, you can have people who are weak in the early game, but as you get through more and more turns, if they've survived, then they become more powerful, and then they can play out the role that they had in Dota 2. Yeah, absolutely. it's not to say that other card games don't have strategy. Of course they have strategy. You know, the top Hearthstone players are amazing, but the way strategy works in this game is a very different method of doing it. Yeah, it's a truly fascinating game, and I can't wait to get hold of it. I think there's so much potential here. I mean, Valve wouldn't make it, right, if it didn't have the potential. You know, there's this clear confidence behind it, and I think from when our journalist Ali has played it at the event, I think he saw that confidence in it too. So yeah, so that's how to play, I guess, a round of Artifact. When you've done all that, when you've gone through all 3 of your lanes, when you've done your buying phase, you start again and you go back to that back and forth until, I say, either 2 towers are destroyed or an ancient is destroyed. I can see these games lasting quite a while. I mean, I'm sure we'll find sort of like speedrunners that know exactly how to put together a deck for a really quick victory. Yeah, exciting things on the horizon for Artifact. If you're interested in the game, please do head to PCGamesN.com. We've got loads about Artifact. We have all the news stories that happened from the event last night at Valve's offices. You can find out kind of like, you know, the monetary ideas for the game, you know, who's behind it, what cards you get. I believe there are 280 cards that are going to ship with the game. Presumably that is only going to grow over time because like success almost seems to be on the cards for this game from what I can see. But until next time, please do like and share and subscribe, and we'll catch you next time.
Bye.